Cool. Okay, so why don't we just go ahead and get started, guys? Thank you so much, and welcome to one of many online panels or Q&As or classes that we have been hosting here at VME. Really excited about our panelists today because there are so many people that were interested in learning about producing. We're conducting this as a webinar, so you can chat. You also will be able to if you want, raise your hand and do some talk back with Brian. I'll be monitoring that. But really excited to have him on board. Okay, John is saying thank you for doing this. Appreciate that, John. Mia Rivera says hi, Mr. McLaughlin.
Hi.
Okay, hey Brian, good to see you from Leon Farmer. Thank you, and thank everyone for taking the time. We're going to be doing producing. So just a few guidelines for you guys. If you want to use question, use the raise hand functions so we can unmute your mic if you actually want to talk to our panelists. Please use the Q&A portion to ask questions, not the chat, so we don't miss any actual business that you're interested in. And this class will last about an hour and a half. Most of the Q&A portion will take place at the back end of it, and so there will be opportunity to talk back and ask Brian some questions. But first, and most important, the sound off. Before you are the panelists, I'll let you go ahead and do the sound off. I think Karen is on. If Karen wants to join us as well, she definitely enjoys this.
I know she does.
Yeah.
Poor Navy.
Oh, there she is. Karen is in space, everyone.
Karen, you're muted.
Cool. So go ahead. Go ahead. You're muted. So.
Sorry, Brian. I said I'm excited to watch and judge you tonight. It's going to be fun.
I appreciate the judgment.
Of course. Happy to support you too. Thank you so much for doing this.
My
I know
pleasure.
You put a lot of time and effort, and we're really grateful. As always, for years you've been helping with these PGA things and classes, so thank you, Brian.
My pleasure.
Someone wants to know if we can record this and able to view it later. That's actually a question we should ask.
I just clicked on record at the bottom, and
perfect.
We'll see what happens.
I put Brian McLaughlin on spot right there because typically we have to ask the panelists, but I know he doesn't mind. Okay, cool. So we'll start with the sound off. Whoever you guys want to start with first.
We start with the best. How many Army people out there? Respond on what, chat or raise your hands? Or
they raise their hand. They
raise your hand at the bottom.
Joel, Derek, Mike, Susan, if you guys can see it. David Mendez, Karen Kraft. There's a ton of hand raising. Richard Hanley, Carolina, Andrew, Tony McBride, William Kelso.
I don't know how to raise your hand here.
I think there's like a raise your hand function at the maybe under.
Anyway, I'll raise my hand this way.
Yeah. Okay, who's next?
I don't think that's it. That's all we need to do. I guess the second best would have to be Space.
Though.
Oh, we don't have the Space Corps up there.
We do on the Grindstone one of the others, but I have to update this particular one.
How about Air Force? Any Air Force?
There we go. Devin, Joe, Dennis, Scott, Brolin, Todd, Paul, Andy, Joseph, Maggie, DeJuan Smith is here.
Maggie, that makes me
Maggie.
happy.
Cool. So Air Force representing. Who's next?
Navy.
Oh Lord, the Navy. Jeff Prater, Alex. You got Ken. Ricky Reba's here. Libby Fritz. What's up, Libby? Lawrence, Erica, Ellis. What's up, Erica? Richard Hanley just keeps raising his hand. He's raised his hand like 6 times.
He supports everyone.
Libby, you can't, it doesn't count for twice, guys, if you just keep raising your hand.
And then.
Oh, Devin's like, I served 3 in the 4. I got you. You're right. You can raise your hand multiple times.
And then the little brother of the Navy, the Marine Corps.
I'm sure they appreciate that, guys. Joshua, Holly, Andrews, Leon. Oh man, I'm missing. There's so many Marines. They're very efficient. They all go at the same time, so it's hard for me to like capture them all. Thank you guys. Steve Harris. Talking all this big stuff when people can't argue. That's from Melanie. Yeah, well.
And then the littlest brother of the Navy, the Coast Guard.
Any co-Cs? Ah, Jesse Feldberg raised his hand. We got a co-C there. He raised his hand again. I guess he's continuing to raise his hands. Four times he's raising his hand. Cool. Okay, cool, guys. And then just some fun stuff. If you can, type it in the chat. Where are you guys from? What city are you guys calling from as you sit in your homes on lockdown? Inglewood, we got LA. How are you doing on lockdown, by the way, Brian and Karen? North Hollywood.
I'm surviving. It's
Decatur.
I find it hard to
awesome.
motivate myself, but
holy cow! I'm gonna go through all these. This is great. You got Marietta, DC. We got Decatur, Santa Clarita, Temecula, which is wine country.
Somebody was very specific with Chinatown there.
Newport Beach. We got NoHo, Valencia, Marietta, Santa Monica. What's up, Santa Monica? West Side, LA, Silver Lake. We got North Dakota. Wow. What's up, Pierre? B to the bank is where Libby said she's from. B to the bank. Downtown Brooklyn, baby. What's up, Brooklyn?
I'm in the IE. Any IE? Do we see any?
What the hell is IE?
Inland Empire. I'm in Upland.
Inland Empire.
Save me the commute.
Chinatown, Orange County, North Hollywood, New York, Lake Arrowhead, Studio City, Palms. What's up, guys? Man, really pumped to see you guys. I'm just having something else relate. Cool. Well, that is all for the official kind of business. I'm going to turn it over to Brian McLaughlin. Karen, if you want to introduce Brian, tell him what a terrible human being he is, all that good stuff.
He's Brian McLaughlin is actually the opposite of that, which is painful for me to actually have to admit. You know how tired I am to actually just give in. But Brian has been with from day one when we were VFT and also through VME. He's a member of the Producers Guild, and he works really hard behind the scenes, helping his fellow veterans get as much access to top of the line producers, education, and information. And he does that every year. He puts on panels of top PGA producers to benefit VME members. So I'm really grateful. And he always has a positive attitude. He eats a lot of pizza though when we do our fellowship nights, I'm just mentioning. But so we always have to add extra. But I really appreciate him doing this tonight. I'm gonna bow out in a few minutes and just do this, but I'm here. For a lot of you don't know, I also produce for a living, but I keep it very, very down low on what I do. But just so you know, Brian, if everybody after this class, please keep an eye out the next day or two. And please let me know in the chat room. We're going to be doing VME serves, social media campaigns, and calling for blood drive support help next Saturday or any blood drive near you. And also some additional social media support for some of these campaigns. So keep an eye out for that. There's a whole team working for the last 72 hours. And there's a lot, I see some of the members are Paul Lilly, Will Kelso, a lot of them all doing this. So this is kind of exciting. And the last thing is, if a lot of you are interested in, this is the last little piece of business, we were gonna do some virtual meetups by different areas of the country. So if you live in the Georgia, Florida area or the Washington state area, can you throw in the chat room if you would be interested in meeting vets within 100 miles of you? And that would just help us know if we should move that forward. So thank you so much. So if that works, that would be great. All right, over to you, Brian, my friend. Thank you for this. I've got the space background and you're wearing the space shirt, so.
All right, I'm switching to share my screen with everyone, which is where I have the presentation. Thank you, Karen and Rebecca. I wanted to start off with a couple remarks to sort of set the scene. Producing in film and TV there's some overlaps, but there's also a lot of big differences. So I'm focused on film, which is where most of my experience is, and that's what this presentation will be on, and specifically on narrative film, so not documentaries, even though much of this applies to docs too. Also understand that, please, that this is just an introductory class. It's basically an hour-and-a-half version of a semester course that I taught. So VME is saving you each $5,000. And like any other craft, acting, directing, editing, whatever, there's a lot to be learned and in producing in order to do it right. I was an actor for several years before I became a producer, so I'd been on shoots, dozens of times. And then when I started thinking about becoming a producer, I put in 9 months worth of research before I actually took the leap. And then in the 15 years since then, I continue to learn every chance I get. So I encourage you to do that as well, and not think that this hour and a half is all you need. I'm going to use my own personal experience as examples, not because I've done everything right, which I certainly have not, but because that's what I know best. And you know, just to understand why I will be saying, referring to my projects quite a bit. And finally, just a few thanks. First of all, to VME for giving me this opportunity and for everything VME does for all of us. Specifically to Rebecca Murga for her help in running this and organizing it. Also to my producing partner, VME member Penelope Kaur for her contributions to this presentation. And to all of you who are here today interested in listening to me talk for a long time. So thank you very much. Penelope may chime in at some point, just so you know, she's apparently the other Brian McLaughlin shown as a panelist. So don't let that confuse you. So I get asked a lot what oops, hang on, let me make sure okay. I get asked a lot what a producer does, even by people in the industry. It's a very kind of arcane science, I guess. And the answer is we do everything. We get water for people, we empty trash, we run to the airport to pick people up. Anything that has to be done, we do. And in fact, we should never ask other people to do something that we wouldn't do ourselves. And probably more specifically, the things I'm going to talk about today are these items, and they're just really a fraction of what a producer does. But we only have a couple hours, so I can't talk about everything. And the role evolves over time with new media and other things that go on, quarantines, things like that. So as Rebecca mentioned, any questions you have, use your Q&A icon on the top or bottom of your screen. And she may interrupt me at times if the question is relevant to what we're talking about right then, or we'll cover those at the end. And basically, I've left about a half an hour of the 2 hours for that. All right, so the first topic, the producer's role. We are basically have overall responsibility for everything from the first idea of the film to the final payments and closing the LLC. This the business side and the creative side. Of course, a lot of this gets delegated or collaborated with other people. The first thought of any project usually comes from the producer, and you could argue from the screenwriter, but once the producer picks a script to produce, then that's when the project really gets initiated. And the last person to think about a project is going to be the producer as they close out the LLC and distribute those last few pennies that trickle in. Let's see. Also, it's typical to have probably 7 projects going on at any time. I heard that actually that number quoted in a Q&A once, and I thought, oh, we have 7 projects, so it was perfect. So everything we talk about today, multiply that by how many projects you have going on. So we create the opportunity. We come up with ideas, I mentioned. It all starts with the producer. We say, okay, we're going to do this project. An idea for a story doesn't cost anything, so you don't even have to raise money to come up with an idea and start developing a project, or getting the intellectual rights, or maybe getting attachments and all the things we're going to talk about today. I keep looking over to my left just because I have some notes over here. And in fact, I'm going to switch the page. So it all starts with the story idea. And then you start to develop from there. And the ideas can come from anywhere. So a lot of the typical things like a book. So one of our projects is a memoir adaptation. Another one came from 2 radio segments on Science Friday on NPR, and so they've combined into our. We have a sci-fi project. Could be people and the stories of their lives. We have a military project about a guy that I worked with in Afghanistan. It could be from your own lives. At least one of the projects that Penelope has written is inspired by things in her life. We have one that's a real loose connection to a comic book. And it could just be any idea as you're driving down the road, or you're taking a shower or falling asleep, when ideas come to people. And then the last really important role, I think, for producers is to build relationships, build a network of people that each of us supports, or that they support us in any way or pass along information. Building your network, and people, you know, particularly people who are new to LA probably think, well, how do I build that network? You just reach out to anyone you can possibly reach out to, and try to do it without expectation of gaining something from the relationship. And in fact, it's better if you have something to offer, like you're willing to volunteer, or you know a connection, or whatever it happens to be that you can give, rather than always being asking. I remember meeting someone recently, and the second thing out of his mouth was, "We're looking for whatever amount of money for our film." And I said, "Well, I don't do that." And he literally stopped talking to me then. So don't be the one who's always asking. You really, in order to build a network, you have to be as much a giver as somebody who hopefully will get something from the relationship. And I stay till the bitter end of pretty much every event, whether it's the bar night at the Legion, or it's the PGA Awards. And anytime there's somebody I can still meet, I hang around and meet them. So that's another big part of the producer's role. Another thing about producers is attitude. The biggest part of our job. Everybody relies on the producer for the project to happen, and so the producer has to have this great positive attitude. Has to be persistent and persevere throughout years of really struggle or patience. Anyway, you decide if you're going to succeed. As long as you stay in the role and you stay in that career, you will attain some level of success, almost certainly. So it's your decision. And anybody who tells you no at any particular time, whether it's funding or distribution or attaching themselves to your project, don't be discouraged. That just means it wasn't a fit. You know, they're either at that time or that project or that person, it was not particularly a fit. It may be a fit later, or it may be a fit on another project. And all you need is one yes. So don't let the no's discourage you. Once you get that yes, you're off and running. One of my early mentors was a guy named Jerry York. He was on the board of General Motors. He was a business advisor to a guy named Kirk Kerkorian, a billionaire who 3 times owned MGM. I guess he was a serial MGMer, but Jerry agreed to mentor me, and he was a great mentor. And I flew to Detroit to meet with him for a couple hours. And one of the things he said, maybe the only thing that really stuck with me, was that the film industry requires an extreme degree of persistence. And he looked at me and said, "I know you're going to succeed because you have that persistence." And it fired me up, and it continues to fire me up. I don't know if he made that up, just to inspire me, or if he really saw something, but it's kept me going, because I feel like I can't let him down. Another part of attitude is confidence. And this is actually a quote from Clint Eastwood at the very first Produced By conference of the Producers Guild. And he talked about how, as long as the producer, in his case, producer director, walks on the set and has confidence, everyone else on the set will be confident that they can accomplish their goals for the day. And it just flows down the positive attitude. And I've seen plenty of examples of that on a shoot where there was a whole, I don't know what number of shots that had to be completed that day, when the director or the producer was easygoing and confident about the whole thing. Everybody was easygoing and got the job done. And conversely, I've been on shoots where it was an easy day and it didn't get done because the producer or the director was frantic and worried and just made everyone else feel like it couldn't happen. So, and please don't think I'm talking about your shoot, anybody in particular, because it really happened a long time ago back in Tucson. Let's see, another thing, your uniqueness is where you'll succeed. I wish I could remember who said this, but it was really kind of mind-blowing when I heard this, because people tend to follow the market, excuse me, and look at what has succeeded recently and try to replicate that, but that's not how you succeed, because that's inauthentic. You should look at your own life, patterns you've had in your life, and that's what should be reflected in your content, either consciously, or in my case, really, it's been unconscious, that the patterns in my life, and what I think about specifically is diversity, seems to be reflected also in my content. So my mother is from Thailand, so half my family is Asian. And I lived internationally for 11 years in Europe, and worked for many other years internationally from the States. And then I've been involved in diversity organizations since the early 2000s. So I've always felt like, oh, diversity is what this uniqueness is about me. But just actually when preparing this presentation, I had another thought. Oh, and before I leave that note, and if you look at the 8 films we have in development, I think it's 5 of them have female leads, and 6 of them have diverse cast, and all of them have one of those 2. And it wasn't anything we thought about consciously. It just happens to have come from our attitude, I guess. And the thing I thought about this week might be another pattern in my life is that a lot of our projects have to do with underdogs. And I was the littlest kid all through grade school and half of high school. I was the littlest kid in the class. I was horrible at sports, completely unathletic. So, talk about an underdog. I mean, how many girls in high school wanted to go out with the shortest guy? I'm going to answer that question for you. It wasn't a lot. And so, I look at the projects we have now. One of them is about a bunch of unarmed civilians fighting 3 deadly killers. One of them is about a soldier facing 30 people by himself. Another is about these little creatures who are defenseless, and we have one about orphans, and so on. All these underdogs, and I just noticed that pattern, like I said, as I was preparing this presentation. So look what's unique throughout your life, what has been a pattern, and try to roll that into your content, and that's how you'll succeed. And then another part of the attitude is go with your gut. Sure, listen to your brain, because your brain is pretty smart and your brain is rational and sane, but your brain will try to protect you and will look at ways to be safe, where your gut knows what you can do, what you really can do, and what you have to do as a person. And so trust your gut a little bit. I'm not saying going completely against your brain, but your gut, you look at the people who we admire and the stories that inspire us. They're usually about someone who took a chance and did something that their heart said to do. Okay, so on that theme, like about creating content, how do you select projects as a producer? The criteria I'm going to list right now, most of them came from Kathy Schulman, who produced Crash and Otherhood and 5 Feet Apart and The Illusionist, a whole bunch of movies. And she talked about this at the Produced By conference. And I've added 1 or 2 things, but these are basically from her. 1, pick a project that you'll stay interested in for 5 to 15 years, because the average gestation period for a film is probably 7 years. Our oldest one is 10 years old now, and it'll probably be at the very least a year before we start shooting it, and maybe a year after that before it's on screen. So a 12-year project at best. Think about what interested you 10 to 15 years ago. Some of you, that's half your life ago. What were you interested in now that you're still interested, or then that you're still interested in now? So that's the kind of interest you have to have in these projects. Let's see. Also, it has to be something you just can't stop thinking about. If you talk about it one day and forget about the next, then it's probably not the project that you have enough passion about. Whereas if you're always talking about it, that's probably something you're going to stay interested in. The project should have some element of universal truth. So even though it's a goofy comedy or a vampire or zombie movie, find something in it, probably in the B story, that connects with everyone at the gut level, at the heart level. And that's the way you elevate the genre. So we have one in particular that is a crime story. It's the one I mentioned about these 3 hardened criminals. The Penelope and I and our writer Ken, who's also a VME member, we wove into that. Now Ken had a great thing, and it already had most of these elements, but Penelope and I helped and kind of, I guess, enhance these elements of the bond between people, kind of a family connection between them, and some redemption stories. And it's on the protagonist and the antagonist side. So in a sense, we felt like we're elevating the crime genre. So look for that in a project. That will help the audience connect to it, and also help you stay passionate. Also, that you should be able to state what it's about in a sentence or 2. And this may sound easy, but when someone says, "Oh, I want to do a movie about my life," you probably can't describe that in a sentence or 2. So narrow it down to something that you can explain concisely. That will help. Those previous couple of points will help the audience care, which is important. You have to know that the audience will care about your project, and specifically that there's at least one strong demographic factor. So what does that mean? There's an identifiable audience for this film. And we talk often about a 4-quadrant film. The 4 quadrants are, and they go horizontally and vertically, male, female, under 25, over 25. So the 4 quadrants are, you can figure it out from there. So for example, Frozen is probably the quadrant that is for females under 25. Not that everyone can enjoy the film, because most people can, but that's really the target audience. And that's what we're talking about. And it can be other demographics. It can be African Americans, Hispanics, veterans, seniors, faith-based films, horror films. Those are other kind of demographics that your film can identify with. Here's one that I added on top of what Kathy Schulman had said, and that is the writer's resume. Someone wrote to me last week on LinkedIn and said, very proudly, I finished the first draft of my first screenplay. Do you want to produce it? And the answer is no, because, I mean, yes, there are writers who can kick ass and do a great first script, and but the odds are against it.
It's actually priceless.
All right, so contrast that to Ken Henderson, a VME member, Navy, and then Army National Guard. So he would have raised his hand twice. He's been a top 50 in the Nickel Fellowship and a semifinalist 3 times in the Nickel Fellowship. He's a Page Award Gold Prize winner. He's had 3 produced scripts. He's written 9 scripts on contract. And so when I think about like who's an ideal writer, he's it, as far as if a project that I want to consider. And sure enough, he did the first 2 projects that I produced. That's how I got to know him. He's written our next 2 projects, and one other project for us. So clearly we seem to like him a little bit. And then finally, here's another quote from Clint from that same presentation, the same discussion. Story is inspiration. So if you're passionate about the story, that's what's going to inspire you. It's not going to be who the attachments are or how much you can make it for, what the genre is. It's the story. Like our military one is about a guy who fought off by himself 30 enemy combatants. I mean, it's an amazing story, and we will be passionate about that for long after it's out on DVD and everything else, and had its theatrical run. All right, so moving on to, now you've selected your projects. Switching notes again. Getting into developing them. So you've picked a project. What do you do to get it ready to get funded and so on? The first thing is keep improving it. So yes, as a writer or even as a producer, you love that first draft. But trust me, you're going to love draft number 12 and draft number 20 far more. So keep rewriting, keep improving it. Our writers, Ken and Ginia and even Penelope and I write also and give each other notes. Our writers love that we give extensive notes. It shows that we care, and it shows that we have some knowledge of the screenwriting craft and respect for it. So keep improving it. This may seem obvious. Make sure there's a clear beginning, middle, and end. But for example, when someone's doing a story about someone's life, people don't live lives with a clear beginning, middle, and end. So select something from that life that fits a story structure. A bad example, negative example is Get On Up about James Brown. It was about his whole life, and at some point I was starting to, how do I know when this movie is going to end? Contrast that to Lincoln, which was about 2 weeks of his life, something like that, when he was trying to get the legislation passed to free the slaves. That's obviously a great story and told in a story structure. And to expand on beginning, middle, and end, make sure you have some solid beats, an inciting incident, a decision, an active decision on the part of the protagonist to go down a certain path, and so on. Like there's so many books that give you story structures. I happen to be a save the cat kind of guy, which amuses my producing partner sometimes, but I do admit the book is 15 years old, and there have been others that have come out since then that are just as valid. So as you're working on the plot, as I've been talking about, also pay attention to the underlying theme, and make sure, like I said in the last chart, that you have some universal, some real primal urge. So it's not just a story about how a character goes from A to B, but why. You know, it's the B story really here. So make sure that's in there, and you're not just telling the A story. Challenge every scene. This, if you're also the writer, this gets really difficult because you love everything you've written. There's scenes that have this amazing dialogue, you think they're hilarious or moving or what it happens to be, and it shows a lot about the characters and how they interact. And then somebody gives you notes and says that scene doesn't move the plot forward at all. You're like, oh, but it's a great scene. And this is almost a verbatim conversation. It's like, yeah, well, take that great scene and have it move the plot forward, or get rid of it and move that great dialogue in another scene, or just say goodbye to it. And after being told this like 3, 4, 5 times, I finally saw the light and had to get rid of 1 or 2 of my favorite scenes. But it made the film so much better because that scene stopped the forward momentum of the story. Similarly, when you get the luxury, when you've gotten all the scenes and the bigger things done, look at every line and say, is that dialogue interesting enough? Is it cliche? Is it a trope? Is it lazy writing? And not that I've ever run into that from anyone that I work with, but for example, I mean, some things you just don't notice because it tells the story adequately. There was one recently, this is not a criticism at all, but there was one in our military film in which a soldier has been shot in the leg and another soldier says to him, can you walk? And the guy says, yeah. Well, like on about our 12th or 15th rewrite, that line kind of jumped out as maybe, yeah, can be a little bit more interesting. And we pointed that out to Ken, and Ken came back with an absolutely better line and more interesting and showed more about the character. And so try to do that also. Optimize every character. Make sure even the supporting characters have a little bit of an arc. Make sure they have enough lines. We have one that takes place in an orphanage, and there's 14 kids, and giving 14 kids enough line is pretty tough, enough lines. So, you know, we noticed that one character had a line on page 20, and then the next line was on page 90. We're like, can we give that character more lines, or take away those 2 lines so that the audience doesn't have to think, well, who was that again? So, I'm not saying get rid of a character because we still need to have 14 kids in there, but do they all have to have lines, or can we give that character more lines? And that's what we ended up doing. A funny example of that is in the Pitch Perfect movies. There are these 2 singers, the 2 characters who are in the a cappella group for all 3 movies, but they have hardly any lines. And in the 3rd movie, they have this running joke about the 2 of them. Anyway, see it if you want to. It's not for everyone. Okay, one of the most important thing in developing your project is to demand tough love feedback. Let's see where I am. Yeah, it's great to get praise. It's great to get compliments, but those don't help you at all. What you need is a criticism and someone who is diplomatic, but not doesn't sugarcoat and it doesn't let you get away with stuff that really is hurting the project. Penelope and I tend to give, over the course of a few rewrites, well over 100 notes on a script. Sometimes on one rewrite, we'll give close to 100 notes. And it's not that we didn't like what was written, but it's like, here's where it can be improved. When I was in the Producers Guild's diversity workshop, Kathy Schulman, I keep mentioning her, but anyway, she just happens to keep coming back into my career. But I gave her a 3-minute pitch, and she gave me 20 minutes of notes back. And people said to me afterwards, oh, I'm so sorry that she was so mean to you. And I said, she wasn't mean. That was a gift. That was like an invaluable thing that you can't pay for. So seek out criticism, actually. And then, have table reads, mentors, paid consultants, every way that you can get good, professional, honest feedback on your project. All right, so then once you've gotten it developed, what's the next step? Well, you got to know how much money it's going to cost. And to do that, you have to come up with a schedule. The easiest way to do it, the roughest way to say how many days is the shoot going to be, is to divide the number of pages by how many days you think you can shoot. Now, if it's a simple project, simple story, only a couple locations, not many characters. Maybe you can shoot 6 pages a day, and it's a 120-page script. That means 120 divided by 6 will give you 20. There are 5 days, and so 20 days or 5 days in a week generally when you're working. So that's 4 weeks, and I distinguish it between weeks and days because in between those weeks you're probably still having to pay for lodging and things like that. So you have to know not just the days, but how many weeks that turns out to be. Better than doing that really quick estimate is to do a script breakdown, and that is taking every scene and saying who is in this scene, what actors, what vehicles, what locations, what props, is it day or night, what are the is it interior, exterior, and so on. How long is the scene? And you make that list going every scene chronologically from start to finish. Then you reorganize those scenes based on location. You resort them based on location, interior, exterior, day, night, and what actors are in them, because you might want to shoot out an actor in a condensed amount of time. And then you go from left to right once you reorder them and say, how long is each scene? When is that up to 6 pages for the day? And so that's day 1, and then here's day 2, and so on. And that's how you get the number of days and the number of weeks. That's quite an effort. Penelope and I did that for our simplest film, which is a 3-location, 8-character film. It took us 6 hours to do the script breakdown, if I remember right. And then the next day or someday soon after that, we did the strip board, as they call it, which is the rearranging of those scenes. It's a long effort.
Hey, Brian, real quick, one quick question that has to do with this.
Sure.
Wouldn't the breakdown be the job of the line producer?
So yes, it is what the line producer does, and then the AD does it on set for scheduling the days. But I'm talking about just before you've hired a line producer, before you're hired an AD, and you just want to get a feel for the schedule, for the number of days, so that you can go out and look for money. So you can come up with a budget and look for money.
And one more question that has to do on this topic is, what program do you recommend for a script breakdown? Movie Magic?
So yeah, that's probably the most common, and I was just about to say that software will do this for you. So that good feeding me the line there. But yes, Movie Magic's common. I really am not all that familiar with it because I'm not an AD, so I'm not a line producer, so I'm not familiar with which ones are the best ones. But Movie Magic is probably the most common, the most typically used. And
I'll if I can hop in real quick. Movie Magic is industry standard. There are a couple other programs. Studio Binder is a paid, very kind of simple. If you don't know much about or want to download software, you can pay. It's a simple thing where you can, if you have a short film, if you have a feature film, you can load it up and you can kind of do a small breakdown, a kind of super rough schedule. It's pretty intuitive. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of different types of programs for breakdown, but typically if you hire someone, that's why you hire them, is because they know those programs.
Yeah, and they will charge, a couple $1,000, maybe more, maybe less. So, but it's worth it. I talked through the manual way of doing it, and Penelope and I did it manually because it's a good way. It's a good understanding to have, so you know what the software is doing for you. So once you have your schedule, you know how many days it's going to be. Then you can translate that into a budget. You can basically say, okay, the crew's going to be needed for all those days. The main actors are going to be needed for almost all those days. And so on, and the other actors less and less. So you start though by having a reasonable target in mind. You think about, okay, the last project I did was a certain amount, or maybe it's only been a short. So the next one I'm going to do is going to be some multiple of that budget-wise. So my first projects were $60,000 and $70,000, and so the next one after that was $300,000, and the next ones we have coming up are going to be somewhere between $1 million and $2 million on the next the crime one that I described a few minutes ago, kind of described. So anyway, be a little bit realistic. I was at a conference probably in the late 2000s, and it was for Film Independent. I'd done 2 or 3 films at that point, and I tell you, every single person I met, it's like they had planned this behind my back, but every single person I met said they had a $3 to $5 million film that they're going to do, and they had never done a film before. I wish them luck, but I really would be surprised if anyone is going to give a producer $3 to $5 million. First of all, you pick a number, not just a range, but give that amount of money to someone who's never produced anything. So be reasonable. And the reason you have to come up with a target is because then you look to your guild minimums, which are broken down into budget levels, and then you can find the rates for each person. So you go down your list of cast and crew, and you say, okay, the SAG minimum is for that budget range is so much, and then the DGA, which is the directors, the UPM, the production managers, and the ADs, first AD, second AD, and any additional ADs. Those are all priced out by the DGA. The WGA is just a one number for depending on the budget. It's not based on days. IATSE, the union for the different crew positions, has some rate cards that they're a little hard to find, but if you can get them, use those. And otherwise, you start from those top people and you kind of spread the other pay for people based on from starting there and going down to minimum wage or just above minimum wage for your PAs. And you kind of spread them evenly based on the positions. And otherwise, like we said on the previous slide, hire a line producer to do this for you. If you're going to go out and get a loan or get private equity or get a studio funding or whatever, you're going to need a budget from a real line producer. So at some point you're going to have to make that payment. So let's see. Moving on. So then you take that money I forgot to say, also include the fringes, which is Social Security, unemployment insurance, things like that, the guild overheads, and also include a reserve of generally 10%. If it's a more complicated film, you might want to go higher. Anyway, so then you take that information, your budget amount, and you put it into a business plan. If you don't know how to write a business plan, find someone who does, because it's important to be able to show a lender or private equity investor that to give them confidence in you. And to do that, it has to be well written. So if you don't know how to write it, if you're not a good writer, or if you don't know how to write a business plan, you might want to hire someone to do that for you. There's a book that you'll see at the end of the presentation that describes how to do a business plan. So if you want to do it on your own, that's a really good resource. So like I said, the main purpose is to win the confidence of the investors. I happen to be pretty good at this, and my producer guild mentor, I asked her to review my business plan once about 8 years ago, and she said that's the best business plan I've ever seen, and it was based on this Louise Levison book. So you'll be able to do the same thing. But that's the kind of reaction you're looking for. What goes into a business plan? These are the elements. They can be in whatever order suits you. The executive summary has to come first. It's a 1 or 2 page summation of everything else. It's generally written last because you're summarizing those other sections. I like to put the industry first because that gives us a big picture, kind of the context, then put the project in to get them fired up about what you're passionate about. Probably the most important section is the team, because people want to work with other people that they like, people they like, they trust, and so really sell yourselves in that section. Then you talk about the market, your competitive strengths, your competition, how your film's going to be distributed, and then the financials are also very important. Despite the fact that everyone knows, not just in this industry but in any industry, that the financials in a business plan are made up. Like, you don't really know what you're going to get back, but this is your best guess. So what the investor wants to see at this point is that you understand where the money's coming from and that your figures are reasonable. Part of that is your comps, your comparable films. Don't pick films that are wild exaggerations like, don't pick Endgame as your comparable film. Pick things that are really similar to yours, but that have made a profit, and so they support your evidence. They provide evidence that you're also going to make a profit. We actually use, I don't know anybody else who does this, but we use an average of 20, 30, 40 films that are comparable. For example, all military films in the last 5 years, and then we take the average of that. It's not something that everyone does, but it's something that I feel really represents the projection, the expected projections or the expected outcomes most reasonably. So that's your business plan. Now, honestly, most people aren't. Yeah.
Brian, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? Because
Sure.
they're adding up, and I know we've covered a few.
Yeah.
So if we can talk a little bit, that's my dog. Shut up.
Is that a dog? I didn't know that
I know,
was.
sorry. Talking contingency. John was told that he's been advised it should be about 10%, but for indie films, there really isn't one. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then Nick Gibo is asking about overtime costs in the rough budget. Do you include them? Do you not?
So in order, I don't know why you would not have contingency. I think everyone has to have a contingency. I would think that a smart investor would want you to have contingency. My third film, the executive producer saw that we had a contingency in there, a reserve, and he said, and he thought we were just trying to take money from him. And I said, no, if we don't have to spend that money, you don't have to pay it. Like, you aren't just giving him a lump of money. He was paying everything directly. So I get that maybe it's harder to raise money for that last 10%, but you have to have it in there, or else you're just going to get, it's going to come up. You're going to have, you haven't planned out everything. So if you don't have any money there, you'll run out. I don't understand why somebody would say that. And as far as Nick goes, yes, if you plan to shoot 12-hour days, then budget for 12-hour days. You plan to, I think our budget has 10-hour days in it. So the last 2 hours are at time and a half. And therefore they basically are the equivalent of 3 hours. So yes, you should have that in there.
And then one question is about comps. Like, where do you find comps?
On IMDb Pro, like I live on IMDb Pro. I'm on it many times a day, and it's just well worth, for me anyway, well worth the cost. So you can search for films under a whole bunch of genres. There's a search function, and released films, and you can select the budget level. You can select the years. You can select the genres. You can select where they were shot, country, stuff like that. And that's how, particularly the genre thing, the genre and the budget are really the functions there that are going to be important to you. And then you just go through, you spend hours and hours. This isn't quick. It's hours and hours of looking through these films and seeing which ones really relate to your film.
Yeah, it's Box Office Mojo.
Yeah, and both of those, I think one is owned by the other now.
Yeah, I think IMDb Pro just bought them out a while ago, but they're the ones I use all the time.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if since I'm not there as much, I do go there occasionally, but I don't know what kind of search features that site has. But if it's similar, then great.
Yes, fair.
And then one last question, and then I'll save the rest for later, is could you explain the various types of producers on a project? For example, like the difference between an executive producer, then the other one.
Yeah. So on a film, so on TV, I won't get into TV because I'm not that familiar with TV. And TV is just really a succession of writers, even though you do have a physical production producer, I believe, also on shows. But in film, you have executive producer, co-producer, associate producer. I think that's usually all there are. The executive producer typically is the person who's provided the money. They could have also provided some other kind of resource, maybe location or maybe an actor. The producer, which the title just says producer or produced by, is the person that we're talking about all through this presentation, who has overall responsibility for everything. A co-producer is usually doing some subset of what the producer does. So they're helping out with, maybe they're just there for production, or maybe they're whatever. Maybe they're only doing some of the, I don't know. There are many examples but they're only doing some of the work of the producer, not enough to be called a producer. And the associate producer does even a smaller subset of that. Quite often, an associate producer was previously the assistant to a producer, and they got promoted, and next they'll be a co-producer, and probably after that a producer. So it's kind of a ladder, a step ladder to get up to producer. That's not the only way you become a producer, but that is a way. But it's not clearly defined, but those last two things.
And while on this topic, William Kelsos asked why, while creative producers have a huge hand in crafting and development of any project, what would a creative producer do once their film is on set and in post?
The first time I heard the term creative producer was when I'd already done 4 films, and I was talking to these 2 people who were longtime TV people, and they said, "So what kind of producer are you?" And I described what I do, and they said, "Oh, you're a creative producer." I said, "Oh, okay." I don't really know what the definition of that is. If it's more of a TV term, I don't feel like there has to be a differentiation. If you're a creative producer, your job can go through post. I mean, there's creative stuff happening in post and on set. So I really don't know if there's if there's a clear answer to that or strict definition of that. I think it's a term people use to describe the main producer. I think kind of what you're talking about makes me think that maybe you're thinking of creative executive, which could be different, but that varies from company to company, in my observation anyway.
Will says, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Will. Okay, so I will move on. So the business plan, I started to say that many people are not going to read it. They really just want to know you have it, and they'll glance at it and say, "Oh, he looks pretty smart," or she does. What they will most commonly look at is, and I'm not saying nobody will, because a lot of people do. It's just that I don't get a lot of feedback, a lot of questions back on a business plan, and I may get more back on a pitch. A pitch, also called a deck, which I think comes from slide deck. I don't really know what that means. But it's kind of a summation of your business plan. And it's a way to, so, ideally you'll have 1 or 2 slides for every section of your business plan. Your job is to get them excited. Your main job is to get money out of them usually. So you could be pitching an actor too, or a director, but mainly with this summation of the business plan, you're looking for money. You're talking to a private equity investor. A lot of us are shy about asking for money. I try to put it right on the first slide saying, bullet 1, we're going to talk to you today about a really exciting film project. Bullet 2, and ask you to participate as an investor. Boom. Now they know that I'm not just there for advice. I'm not just there to entertain them. But the real big thing is you're trying to share your passion in the project. You want to get them excited about this project. So from a financial point of view, a lot of that has to do with the return on investment and how long their capital is going to be tied up. So keep that in mind as you're giving your pitch. It's not all about the story, how exciting it is. It's how much money they're going to make on it, because that's what they do for a living. If you're pitching someone with a lot of experience in the film world, you don't necessarily have to talk to them about every section of the business plan. You don't have to talk to them about the industry or about distribution and marketing. Maybe they know all those things already. So tailor your presentation to your audience. You're also trying to answer all their questions, even if they don't ask them. So as you do this over and over again, you'll find that people have the same questions and same concerns. So try to put those in the pitch already, because maybe they have those concerns and they don't bring it up. So if you ask them, then you've already beat them at the pass, I guess. One important thing, let's see if that's the next bullet. It's kind of related to this, but it's actually the bullet after that. But you only have one chance to pitch to a company. So give it your best shot. And part of that is only pitch when you're ready. So don't do your first draft of the pitch and say, let's go out and present. And I'm pointing the finger at me, because that was me 15 years ago when I first started doing this. We put our pitch together with, at the time I had 3 business partners, and I said, okay, let's go. And they go, no, we have to make sure this is right, that people understand it, that answers their questions. So we did several dry runs and revised the pitch in between each one, and eventually got to the place where they understood what we were trying to say, and we had answered most of their questions. And one of them in particular, one slide in particular, was the waterfall chart, the cash flow. And people didn't understand it over and over and over again. And finally, we got to a place where it made sense to people. And that's still the same waterfall chart I use today. So don't rush out, because if you go to investors when you're not really ready, you will burn those investors and you won't get another shot. Also, when you're in the meeting, when you're in person in the room with someone and they're trying to decide yes or no to invest, the rule of thumb is first person to speak loses. And I don't want to say loses, but so don't jibber jabber and fill the silence, because that'll show insecurity. It'll give them possible reasons to say no. Just wait them out, let them think. More often than not, they'll fill the silence with a yes. So just a general rule of thumb. Don't come back to me later and say it backfired on you. But that's just a general rule of thumb. So what goes into a pitch? It's a start with an attention getter, hook them first, and then you can start getting into more and more details. I will generally start with title, genre, format. So Tiger 03 is a feature film about a true military story. Boom. Then that at least gives them a context, and they say, oh, that sounds kind of neat. Then go into the log line. It's a few more words. It's 1 or 2 sentences. That hooks them a little bit more without boring them. Now that they're more hooked, and you can go into synopsis, which is maybe 3, 4, 5 sentences telling the story. And then beyond that, you can get into characters. You can get into, is that the next? Yeah, that's kind of what this next thing is talking about. Start at the top with the little things, and then more and more as you go along. Characters, the demographics, of the target market, the selling points like the writer's experience or the director or any other attachments. Make it worth their conversation, because whoever you're talking to is probably not going to make the decision right then. They're going to have to go back and talk to their business partner or talk to their spouse, and they're going to have to be able to tell the story too. So get them asking questions, get them really involved in it. Make it I'm looking down at the wrong part of my notes. Make it self-distinguishing. So don't really talk about what studio films it's like. Talk about what's great about this film. And not that that's not also useful, but for example, when we're pitching our military film, we don't talk about how much it's like Lone Survivor. But if we did, if someone were to say, oh, it's like Lone Survivor, then we'd say, yeah, it is, but here's why it's different. It's one guy fighting 30 instead of 4 guys fighting however many they were fighting. So let it stand up on its own. It's a little cliche to say it's film A meets film B. People do that, but the risk of that, kind of like the comparing it to studio film, is that some people will say, okay, it's probably one, they might say I didn't like that film. I didn't like Lone Survivor, or I didn't like American Sniper. Like if we might say it's American Sniper meets Lone Survivor, and they say, I didn't like that movie. So that's the risk of doing that. But also they might say, oh, American Sniper was Academy Award winning or nominated film, I don't remember now. You're not going to make that film. So it's kind of like you're bringing up a possible argument against you. So try to steer away from that. Just talk about your own film. Also sell yourself. Like they're going to put money into, they're going to hire or invest in people they like. That's just everywhere. That's like in a job interview also. Penelope and I were at Amazon, I think it was in December. Hour-long meeting, 40 minutes of it we spent just talking, just chit-chatting with the guy. And like we were just out for coffee basically, even though we're in a conference room. But we didn't talk about our films until 40 minutes into it. But first we asked him what they're looking for. He spent 10 minutes telling us that, and that gave us 10 minutes left to talk about our film. It went really well. It may be it might be counterintuitive, but really form that relationship. Let's see, was that everything? Okay, yeah. So next, now you've got this pitch. Where do you go with it? Well, you can go to studios. They've got a lot of money. They make a lot of movies. This is the question before I go on, this is the question I get asked the most. Like, where do you get the money? Which is ironic that they're coming to me. So yes, I have done 4 films that we paid people on them and everything. But Penelope and I spend as much time looking for money as anything else. And yet in December, one of my friends on the national board of the Producers Guild wanted to meet with me about looking for money. And so did one of the chairs of the diversity workshop. And I thought, okay. And I mean, they were really grateful for what I had to say. And so now you're going to get what I told them. Basically, if you look everywhere you possibly can, You look to the studios. You look to the production companies that have funding. Let's see.
Hey, Brian, can
Yeah.
I go back to pitching real quick and
Yep.
start knocking out some of these questions?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So can we talk about, do you include investment terms in your pitch deck? That's from Joel.
Not in the deck. I don't remember if we have it in the deck. We have it in the business plan. I don't think we have it in the deck. Those are just details. If they're interested, they'll come back to us. You can do it either way. I would say that if you feel like you're offering pretty inviting terms, then include it. Yeah.
Could you give any optical illustrations, etc.? I'm assuming that means
yeah, you should. One, I'm really weak at that though. Two, as you can see from this presentation, there's a nice green elephant, but that's about the only images you see. And that, by the way, if anyone's curious, the name of our company is Emerald Elephant Entertainment. That's why that's up there. I would say yes, if you're good at that, or get someone who is good at that. Some people react, you never know what your audience is. So some people just want to see words and numbers. Some investment kind of people probably do. More creative people or people who are more excited about the movie part of it might want to see more visuals. So kind of go with your gut and go with your skill set.
What's the best way? This is from Brawlin. Sorry. What's the best way to pitch if you're not able to physically be in the room? Is it best to set up a virtual conversation or send a digital package?
I have done mostly the latter. When we couldn't be in the room, we have generally, we have generally like emailed the information to people, and then followed up with a phone call or a Skype or something like that. But ask them what they want is basically what you should do. You say, well, do you want to have a Skype conversation, or do you want me to just send you the information? I think the more of a connection you can have, which would be Skype or a phone call, the better. But it may depend on their schedule too.
This is from Joshua's story. Do you pitch differently to Class A development funds versus Class B brunt of production funds investors?
I'm not familiar with those terms, but I would say no. We have not tailored our presentation. Go ahead.
Joshua, I can, if you raise your hand, I can bring you online to ask that question directly. And then let me see. John is asking, hang on, I'm going to allow Joshua to talk.
Okay, I'm listening even though I'm doing this.
Your mic is muted. I'm going to unmute you.
Go ahead, Josh.
Joshua, we are all waiting.
Oh, it's still muted. It's still muted.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I was just wondering if there was a difference between pitching to investors for development funds versus production funds.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say I had a pitch fest or a pitch for a $10 million film and about a year ago, and we weren't further enough along with our development.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to go back and discuss something differently with their CFO.
Okay. Off the top of my head, I would say I can't think of how you would do it differently. You might, like if it was already written, like if it wasn't written, I guess there's more you could say. You would have to say, like the qualifications of the writer, or you'd still say that. I mean, I really can't think of really big ways you would do it differently. There's not a lot of, I mean, great that you had an opportunity to get some possible development money, because that's pretty rare. But I think it's basically all the same. Maybe it's more of a creative pitch for the development money, as opposed to a dollar kind of pitch. I don't know. Does that help?
I guess that kind of answers my question.
Yeah, I think it's overall the same or very similar.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.
And then I have another question from John Vargados. Will we talk about AFM, the American Film Market? I've heard of having prior relations going. Any experience going? Is it worth it? Are there similar events within VME? I know I have a lot of questions. LOL.
I've been to film market a couple times, and both times I did not have a project I was trying to sell. So, but in overall, my view on film market is that those folks are available 365 days a year. You can reach out to them anytime without having to pay $1,500 or whatever the fee is. That doesn't mean it's not valuable. If you're going to go and meet with 10 different companies, then it's probably well worth the effort. And certainly a lot of people go. And so my guidance that it's not so valuable might be misplaced. But I've had a lot of success in reaching out to people throughout the year rather than specifically at an event. But
if I may,
mm-hmm.
I think that's really good advice. I think where AFM helped me many years ago, it was just to jumpstart relationships. I know how to talk to people. You get a lot of pamphlets, informations, decks, right? Printouts, and just kind of get a feel for the market and what people are pitching and who to talk to. It just helps. It's expensive, but it really does help you kind of get a sense of the different players.
And to follow up on that, I heard a sales agent talking sometime in the last year at a presentation, and he said he gets most of his work done at the bar in the evening.
Right.
So save your money on registering, find out where the parties are afterwards, and go to those and have a 10 pounds worth of business cards and set up meetings, not at the bar, but for later. At the bar, you set up the meetings for later. So
that ties into your point in the beginning, Brian, how you attend every event and every class at VME and meet as many people as possible. It's the same.
Yeah. And really, you're there with something that they want. So look at it that way, is yes, you want what they have to offer, but you're also giving them what they need. So that's in all, like when we're talking about private equity, that's the same thing. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I have a comment from Jeff Prater who says he digs the elephant in the Zoom room. That was just a side thing. Do you present treatments? Do you present treatments as well, or just the project with completed scripts? Do you present treatments as well?
Well, now this gets back to Joshua's question in a way. We have not ever found ourselves in a position where someone had development money for us. If so, then a treatment would be really handy if you didn't have the script. But I think treatments are more for writers who are trying to get an opportunity to get paid to write their screenplays. I think as a producer, you should have a completed script, and not just completed, but you've gone through 20 iterations of rewrites.
And last question before you can go on with the presentation. This is about lookbooks. Do you present lookbooks with your pitches? I guess
we have not.
Do you give a takeaway after?
Yeah, we haven't done it yet, and nobody's asked for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, even though I've heard both sides. Now, what's the bad side of a lookbook is that if you've described a story and they've formed an image in their head and then you show them a different image, you might lose a little bit unless they love your new image. But there's the risk that there'll be a disconnect between what you show them and what they would have pictured on their own. So, but on the other hand, you may win someone over with some really cool graphics. So again, go with your gut, know your audience. Maybe they like to have lookbooks. Excuse me, the first producers roundtable that we did with the PGA, Suzanne Todd said that she goes in with visuals every time. And so I think if it works for you, then great, do it that way. But if not, then there's no requirement for it.
Awesome, thank you. On to funding sources.
Okay. So film funding companies are companies that are in the business of just financing films. And the bullet above that, some production companies already have either they're self-financed or they have relationships with these film funding companies or with banks. but who are these companies? How do you find them? Getting back to IMDb or maybe Box Office Mojo, you look at the companies. So on IMDb Pro, on the right side, they'll list the production company and the distributor, but there'll be you can click on list all companies, and you can see every company involved. Sometimes it'll literally say film funding provided by, and that's great. And that's the company you want to reach out to. Other places it'll say in association with, and that's quite often the film funding company. Other times it won't say any of that. It'll be just listed amongst the production companies, and you have to click on them and see, do they really have producers, or this company keeps on appearing as a production company, but I don't really see them making that many films. So they're probably a financing company, and you can reach out to them just like you reach out to anyone else. But they will have fairly strict requirements on what they want to see. Agencies help with packaging. You can reach out to them, particularly if they've done similar films of what you're doing. All of these, you should be looking for companies and agencies and whatever that have done films like yours. So your list of comp films, go through those and see if those companies might see what they have in their films in development, and see if they keep repeating this kind of film. And then you can reach out to them and say, hey, you guys seem to love this sort of thing. I really liked these last 3 films you did. Can we come in and talk to you about our film? Loans, if you have a tax credit in place, or some pre-sales, or some sales estimates from international sales agents, or if you have a distribution agreement in place with some minimum guarantees, you can borrow against that through banks that do that. And then it gets us to private equity, which I've been talking about a little bit. But how do you find people, individuals or funds, that want to invest in your film? And that gets back to, I think I said it, if not, I'll say it now. You turn over every stone. You look every place you can possibly think of. You look for anyone who has any connection to this film in some way, or to you in some way. So one of our films I've mentioned is a military film. So we've written to venture capital companies that are either run by veterans, or they specifically fund projects for veterans. Most of them haven't been involved in film, so we have to win them over to film. We've also written to wealthy veterans, or in this case, our lead character is a black guy. So we've written to wealthy private equity African Americans, and I've gotten some responses, but we have yet to, of course, get the big thing. We also just recently realized, oh, this guy's actually Dominican American. So I wrote to A-Rod and to Zoe Saldana, and there are a couple others that a friend of mine I noticed that a friend of mine from the Veterans Writing Project at the Writers Guild is Dominican. So I wrote to him and I said, hey man, give us a list of wealthy Dominicans. And so he sent me that, and I haven't acted on it yet. It was a couple weeks ago. But so you look for any possible connection. We also to yourself. So I've written to wealthy people from the 2 colleges I went to. I've written to, what else? Wealthy, my mother's from Thailand. I've written to one wealthy Thai American person, and so on. So you look for any possible connection, and you just write and write and write until some of those folks will be interested, and then you go from there. Let's see, and be sure to follow up. So when you write to someone, if they don't reply, I like to say, actually, I invented this. I like to say it because I just came up with it preparing for this presentation. No reply isn't a no reply. So just a no, not getting a reply just means that your email has scrolled down. They meant to reply to you. Follow up with them once or twice. And after that, okay, you followed up enough. So what else do we have here? You can fill in some of your funding requirements with branded entertainment, which used to be called product integration. So you look for anything that might fit in with your story, and you can get, depending on your project, you can get millions that way, or at least hundreds of thousands. You might at least be able to fill in the gap between private equity and your total budget. So there are several branded entertainment companies in town. Reach out to some of them and ask for informational meetings. And then for documentaries, there are grants. I don't have on the list crowdfunding. It's popular with a lot of people. I think there's a certain limit on how much you can get that way, but just my own personal preference is not what I want to do, but give it a shot if that's what you like. Here's what people are looking for often in the requirements. I put it in quotation marks because, you know, if you can get some of these, go ahead and submit. Even though they say you have to have all of these, give it a shot. First of all, an impeccable story, a finished script. If you, I know we all think our stories are great. We have the best stories ever. Ask a few people who will be honest with you and who are a little bit knowledgeable, and see if they're as excited about it as you are. And if they are, yeah, then great. Start sending it out. Attached talent. I'm going to talk about that, I think, in the next slide. Yeah, in the next slide. But they don't have to be A-list talent. They just have to be marketable. They have to be talented, professional. We had in my second film, we had one of the top scream queens, even though we weren't doing a horror film. We got a scream queen, and she had this following. And because of her, we got distribution. She was also in my third film. And at the time, she was engaged to Corey Haim. And so he was hanging out on the set all the time. And he said, hey, I'd like to, I'll be in the film. And so we put him in. We also had Ron Jeremy. So the three of them got us distribution. None of them are, well, Corey, at the time, he was not an A-list. He had been an A-list actor, I guess, but he wasn't at the time. So you don't need an A-list actor, just someone who your distributor, your sales agents say, yeah, we can work with that. In our third film, my fourth film, one of the producers had connections with a whole bunch of punk rock bands, and they put a lot of their music into, I think, 20 songs into the film for free, and that got us distribution. So look for all kinds of talent. You have to have a solid budget and a schedule. As I mentioned before, some places, some private equity folks or some banks, they require that the budget be done by an experienced and knowledgeable, a reputable line producer. So just know you'll have to pay for it at that point. Same thing with tax credits. You'll have to have someone who understands tax credits, and it could be you. I mean, it's not that hard to understand. Sales agents and distributors, from what I'm told, there's only a small number of sales agents that banks will lend against because of their track record. So make sure when you're going to a lender, you find out for them, is this sales agent acceptable to you? Same thing with distributors. Established producer, that's you. So this is for banks and companies that do this funding for a living. What you can also do is send all your information to literally everybody you've ever met. You know, there are a lot more people than you realize that are willing to put $10,000 into a film that you already know or have known in your life. On my first film, which was the $60,000 film, we raised the money between the three producers. We raised it in 10 days just from writing to people we knew. In the second film, it took us a month, and it was a $70,000 film. So it's very possible to do. I think that was 15 years ago. So now I would think you could raise $150,000. I don't want to say easily, but it's very reasonable to say you can do that from people you know or have known in your life. So don't be shy. And a lot of people are willing to do that just to support you. Okay. Now I said I would talk about name attachments.
Can I
Yep.
Can I ask a couple questions here?
Yep.
When does a lawyer get involved with any of this stuff?
It's never too early, I think, to get a lawyer involved, particularly if you can afford to pay them. So we use a lawyer. So my first partners, I mentioned I had 3 partners 15 years ago. One of them was a lawyer. So a lot of the agreements I have already were drawn up by a lawyer, and I've just used them over and over, and I've just changed the names and the amounts and that sort of thing. It's safer to have a lawyer involved. If you are fairly experienced in contracts and things like that, and you don't have the money to pay a lawyer, then I'm not gonna, then do it yourself. But VME has some lawyers as members. There are lawyers in LA that work with independent films. One of them is Roma. I forget her first name. but a lot of people I know, Noah Waters, I think, has used her, and everyone I've talked to has liked her, and she's comparatively inexpensive in relation to other lawyers. So yeah, I think that when you're going out looking for investment, you probably should have some sort of legal review. Certainly when you're writing contracts with a funding company or a bank, I think you need to have a lawyer at that point. It's not that you can't look at the words and see if it makes sense to you, but there's stuff that might be missing that you don't know about. Karen, were you coming in?
I just wanted to jump in and support you on that. Personally, I say bring a lawyer in as soon as possible and attend many classes that offer free legal advice. And while Brian has a really deep background in producing and knowing what these contracts look like, it's always a lawyer special when someone takes a legal contract off the internet and slices and dices it to think that it works like for them. And that'll get you in a lot of trouble. It's like going to a doctor and saying, can you perform brain surgery on me? Oh no, wait, fix my knee. You know, they're specialists, and they're specialist lawyers, and IP and entertainment lawyers are specialists, and they're designed to protect you. And so one of the serious ways of knowing that you're serious about your project, one of the ways that investors know that you're serious about your project is you have someone that is giving you legal review or a legal part of the team. So sometimes you can ask a lawyer to take a position in your team and help out for title. And I don't mean to be distracting, Brian, but you can do that. But I just can't emphasize enough how much you need a lawyer. I saw Devin's question, and you definitely need a lawyer to help you along to protect your IP. And as Brian said, it's never too soon to bring in a lawyer. It's just very daunting because people don't know what to ask a lawyer, right? So that means we should probably have a separate class. And we've done this in the past with our lawyers. We've had copyright lawyer classes, IP classes. So maybe if you guys think it's a good idea, we'll bring another one back to answer those questions, because it's a very deep area and have to know. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So
Brian, you're doing awesome, by the way.
Thanks, Karen. You're judging me.
There were a couple questions on LOIs. Are you going over that in a little bit? But basically,
On this slide, yeah.
Okay, so
Go ahead and tell me the questions so I can make sure I address them.
Sure. So Joshua, I was looking at the development money to get LOIs from actors or key players of interest, like award-winning production designer for bigger investors. And Susan's question was, are LOIs needed to secure funding?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk about that right now. Is there anything else?
There's a lot more, but why don't we go into that?
Okay.
And then, guys, I'm trying to get to the questions throughout here, but we are gonna go through the Q&A with all the open questions. Okay.
Okay. So people think of attachments versus funding as the chicken and the egg. People have been told you can't get funding without attachments. You can't get attachments unless you have money to pay them. If that is the case, I would say go for the attachments first, because they're probably easier to get than funding. But I would also say that a payment and a contract are very often not necessary. It depends on the actor, it depends on the reps, but it never hurts to ask. One of my friends from the Producers Guild did 2 movies last year, one for Netflix, one for Hulu, and in neither case did he have to have a contract with the actors before getting the funding. The actors just had to be committed to it. They had to, if they were contacted by the companies who were funding it, Netflix and Hulu, then they just had to say, yes, I want to do the film. And so it was free to him to do that. If you want to call that an LOI, you can make it more official that way, but it depends on who's providing the funding and what they're requiring. It's usually, I would say, not going to be a contract, and in terms of from the actor side, many of them do not need to have money in place in order to, or get a payment or a pay or play in order to say, yes, I'll do it. So if the biggest thing is, are they excited about the project? If they are, then they'll probably commit without all that stuff. I would say ask directors before actors, because you want the directors, I think, to have input into your casting. That's the way we've been looking at it. Unless you have an A-list actor that wants to do it, or an actor that any director would want to work with, then sure, go ahead. In that vein, let me see what my next bullet is. Okay, managers may be easier than agents because they have less actors that they're repping or directors that they're repping, and so they're going to be more accessible. And I don't really care how big the name is of the actor. Go ahead and reach out for them. We a few years ago, I reached out to Kevin Hart's manager, and his agent replied back and asked for the script and an offer. We wrote to Sandra Bullock's agent. She replied and read the script for us. We were currently working with Morgan Freeman's company. I mean, these people, we may feel like they're not accessible, but they generally don't think that they're not accessible. And again, we're offering them something they want, not that they're only giving us something that we want. So keep that in mind. As long as you can get them excited about the project, then great. Give them a role that has a great entrance, a great turning scene, like gives them their arc and a big exit. And then the project overall is something they're excited about, then they will very often want to sign up. Or if you've already attached someone, a director or an actor that is a cast magnet, someone that other actors want to work with, then that's great. And sometimes those folks are not necessarily expensive or big names or inaccessible. So not that there's a list of cast magnets anywhere out there, but that's just a matter of talking with people until you find out who it is. Also understand that the time you're waiting for a big star to give you an answer may delay your process by months, particularly if you're going to do one star after the other. And so you might do those in parallel to save some time, but also you might think about looking for money without having the attachments. Because we've only one time run into a company that says, we want to do your film, but after you've attached somebody. Most of them have just said, have you attached somebody? We said, no. They said, okay, well, keep going. And you know, we're going to continue, we're going to consider your project with or without attachments. So it's not always required. When you're making an offer to an actor, ask their agent for their quote, which is, the term means how much they got paid on their most recent film, or how much they expect to get paid on the next film. You know, it's not like they're going to give you documentation, but they'll give you a number, and it's usually a high number. So if they've done a studio film and then after that they did an indie film, they're not going to give you the indie film quote. They're going to give you the studio film quote, and just know that they're highballing you a bit so you can come in somewhat lower. I don't know how much lower. So ask for the quote. And then one point about attachments is that many people who've been successful in the industry have been successful because they had a working relationship with a director, writer, and actor over and over and over again throughout the years. I mean, Peter Berg seems like he can't do a film without Marky Mark. And there are many examples. In our case, I mentioned that Ken Henderson he wrote my first two films. He's writing our next two films, and he wrote one more after that for us. So we have a pretty good recurring relationship with him. So try to look for that, you know, somebody you can work with over and over and over again. All right, let's move on. Let's say you got your funding now and you're getting into production. Excuse me. Production is the most fun part for me.
Can I
Yep.
ask a couple questions? We have some anxious.
Sure, go for it.
LOI, can you just clarify what that stands for?
Letter of intent or letter of interest. It's kind of a commitment saying, I will do this film as long as the schedule and the payments, the price works out.
Are we going to be talking about how funding applies to short films or not? I asked my question ages ago and you've skipped over it.
I'm not going to talk about short films today, but
yeah, I can talk a little bit about short films, crowdfunding. I think there was another question on crowdfunding and how this stuff does affect short films. So I can talk a little bit about that. I'm working right now with the Sundance Labs and a bunch of other folks of helping directors and producers get financing for short films, and just did distribution on a couple of them. So we can touch on it. It's going to be after. And again, guys, our apologies, but we are going to be doing the presentation. So if your question is open, we will get to it. You just have to wait to the end, okay? And then we're going to talk about distribution, correct,
Yes.
Brian? Okay.
I will say on short films, the one nice thing about that is nobody is expecting it to make a return on that. At least they shouldn't be, because they won't. It's unlikely. I mean, there are possible ways to sell your short film, but it's just not very common.
Yeah, nobody ever makes money off of short films, and the short films that do get distribution be through. I had a short film that had distribution on HBO. The financing is so small that it's nobody makes money off of it.
Yeah.
Short films are really just a way to kind of sink your teeth and get experience
And have a
for
calling
everyone,
card.
or have a calling card for proof of concept. Have investors or companies ask for a one sheet? Is it essential?
I like one sheets. I offer to send them out a lot. Occasionally someone will ask for it if I haven't already offered it. It's a great way to get their attention. There's really no set format for one sheet. Mine are very much text versus visual. A lot of them I see great images put in, but it's basically the pitch put into one sheet of paper, and it's at least it'll start the interest. They're not essential, but I think they're helpful. Anything else, Rebecca?
Yes. How often do these funding sources pan out?
I'll let you know.
David,
I mean, it's one time per film. It'll eventually happen. You just got to keep going. And percentage-wise, I would say it's in the low. It's in the single digits, but you don't get there unless you ask all those hundreds of people.
Right. I always say this is the toy department. Everybody wants to be here. So there's, you're doing a lot of competing for money and for financing and for jobs. David Mendez, what's the best way to approach a producer what would be the best way to approach a producer and wanting to become an associate producer if you don't have any experience producing, but you have years of experience in other areas such as an AD, actor, or other crew on set?
Reach out for an informational meeting, I would say, is the first step. And if it's somebody that, if it's a big producer, then yeah, I think it's still the same. Reach out for an informational meeting, say, I want to come and introduce myself. Here's my background, here are my interests, and come and sit down. In that conversation, you can say, I would really be interested in being an associate producer or anything, or maybe even an office. You start with an office PA or be a coordinator or assistant coordinator. Some of those are guild positions, so they'd be limited. But get the meeting first, get to start a relationship, and then build from there. I know that may not be helpful, but
one last question is about LOIs. Can you back out an actor who signed an LOI if the studio or network that picks up your project doesn't like that actor?
I will say that although I haven't had that experience, I think the answer is yes. Everybody, that's just part of this industry. It happens all the time. Actors back out all the time. So, and actors get cut all the time. So it's just a reality. And I think nobody will take offense that much. They'll be disappointed, but they know the reality.
Okay, you can go on. And again, guys, we're going to answer all these questions after, okay?
All right. So the biggest thing on production is you are the firefighter. You're the one looking ahead, seeing what could go wrong, what have we forgotten, and trying to anticipate, prevent, minimize, and solve those problems. Now, that may be easier said than done. A lot of times you find out about the thing when it's happening, but you got to, and in which case you're still a firefighter. You got to solve the problem at that moment. I mean, one time our DP said to us, "Hey, I could really use a jib for tomorrow." And this was in Southwest Louisiana, where there's not a whole lot of film production going on. And I spent 2 hours online and on the phone, finally found one at a church organization that made their own video. It was 2 hours away, hopped in the car, I think with Ken Henderson, drove up and picked up the thing. They let us keep it for a week for free. And we returned it to them, and they just had me drop it off on their loading dock. So that was great. Anyway, that's not necessarily an important story, but let's see, where was I? Yeah. So you're the firefighter, the problem solver. Ooh, what happened? Okay. Generally, you want to let the director and the AD run the shoot. The director does the creative side, the AD runs the crew. Let them do their job. You've hired them to do that. Too much producer involvement, particularly on the creative side, can really kill things. On my third film, Trade In, the executive producer, who admitted he knew nothing about film, sat down next to the director the whole time, and after every take, told the director what he should do. And it just destroyed the film in many ways. Don't do that as an EP or as a producer. Just let people do what you hired them to do. On my, let's see, make some comments and generally, just be subtle, be nice, be diplomatic about it. Otherwise, you're there to support the director and not undermine anything. Know your strengths and weaknesses. I'm more of a logistic guy. Although I have been an actor, I did a lot of acting and I've done some writing, but I try not to get too involved in the creative side because that's not where my strengths lie. Hire smart people who make you look good. There's a guy named Guy Kawasaki who's he's a private equity venture capitalist kind of guy, very wealthy, and he says, A players hire A players, B players hire C players. And by that he means if you're strong, confident, capable, you're going to hire other strong, confident, capable people because you're not afraid of them. They're better for your project, and you're not worried about looking bad in comparison. Whereas mediocre people, the B players, they hire C players, people who are not as good as them, because they're afraid of not looking good in comparison. Be the A player, hire the best people you can afford, and you'll get the best product that way. You can't do everything. There's just not enough time. So delegate to the people you've hired and you trust, but you do have the responsibility and the time to follow up, to make sure that everything is going well. I didn't do that really well on my third film because everything was really crazy and I was in the production office most of the time. If I'd been out following up with everyone, I would have learned that one of the tripods we had for the camera was weak, and eventually it fell over and a camera broke. So I blame myself for that, for not being out talking to everyone on the crew all the time. So avoid that. And of course, safety. Safety is your responsibility. We've seen people in recent years, producers, get in big trouble for people dying and being injured on their sets. So be on top of that. Some of the potential problem areas, locations, they can fall out the morning when you show up for the shoot. You find out that they're not ready. On my second film, Good Boy, I think we had 3 locations that somehow, for different reasons, fell out, and we had to really scramble to get new locations. So reconfirm often, and make sure you have the right permits. Check a week out, check the day before, look people in the eye and find out. And of course, your location manager is handling a lot of this too, but it's your responsibility to make sure it happens. Extras are extremely unreliable, even on studio films. I was an extra, featured extra, thank you, on The Kingdom, and we had a 3-day shoot of a softball game that lasted literally a couple minutes on film. It was a 3-day shoot, and the first day, let's say there were 50 or 60 extras. The next day, that dropped by 10 or 15, and the day after that, another 10 or 15 left because they just got bored. So be careful with extras. Make sure they're going to be there. Make sure you don't have too many. Make sure you don't have too few. On Trade In, we needed a crowd scene, and I found out the day before that we only had 10 people showing up. So I had everybody on the cast and crew call their friends, and we ended up having enough in the end. Unions, great organizations. They serve a purpose. They help their members. And as long as you do everything right, they're no problem. But if you don't have all your ducks in a row, it can really screw you up. On that same film, Trade In, that I keep talking about, the EP wanted to argue with SAG about one line in the contract, and he delayed sending in his deposit until his lawyers had time to look at that. Well, they knew our shoot schedule had already started, and they were on the phone with me yelling at me saying, "You cannot be shooting. We will send someone down there to shut you down if you're shooting." And I didn't want to lie to them. So I just said, "I understand. I get it. I know." And then we went on. but try not to get in that situation. Special equipment, if you have either camera, lighting, sound, whatever special equipment that you need, or you have props or costumes, whatever that you need, make sure you have backups, because if you lose them or they break or whatever, they get dirty, then you're shut down until you can fix that. Make sure you check on props, set dressing, wardrobe. Make sure it's there for the next day. I had one situation in which the sign that said cafe that was supposed to be on the top of the cafe had not gotten made the night before. And so fortunately we got it in time, but it was a shock to me. Make sure you have the transportation to get everybody and everything to set or to the next location every day. I mean, it may sound simple, but there's a lot of details, a lot of moving parts. Make sure all of them are covered. Animals, kids, stunts, pyrotechnics. Make sure you're doing everything required by law and by your insurance company so you don't get in trouble there. We had an explosion that was in the script and had been approved for a location. The day before, the fire marshal said, "Nah, I don't think you should do it there," and shut us down for the next day. Luckily, I had a friend who had a big piece of land that they lived on, and she let us shoot on her property. Animals, here's for all those things. If you got your insurance with one version of the script, and then later there's a rewrite and you added any of these things in, get back with your insurance person immediately, because that thing is probably not covered. I found out a day before bringing a horse onto the set that we had no animals covered in our insurance because the script had been changed since the insurance was issued. And so I called the insurance guy and he said, "There's no way," sorry, I'm doing this, "there's no way to get you coverage for a horse by tomorrow." And anyway, I did not do the smart thing. The smart thing would have been to cancel the horse, but this was a trained film horse, and I made the decision to just be quiet about it and knowing, expecting that nothing would happen, and nothing did happen. Do not do that. It was the wrong decision, even though nothing bad came of it. So make sure you're covered in all those areas. Okay. So just a little bit more on production. Looking at my notes. Oops. Producing is being a leader. You are the leader on the set. You're a leader on the project. So attitude, like I said earlier with the Clint Eastwood quote, attitude flows from the top down. Always have a positive attitude, be good to people, treat them well. Your military experience is going to come in handy here because you had to do this throughout your military careers. So just like everything else on the set or in the project, morale of your cast and crew is crucial. It's your responsibility. So talk to people, give them days off when you can. Buy them ice cream. One time I was on a scorching hot set and the ice cream man went by. So I ran out, bought ice cream for everybody on the set, and suddenly people started moving better. They were happier and everything went really well. Have your wrap party. Maybe have a party halfway through just to build morale. When an actor finishes, make sure you acknowledge their wrap. Thank people when they do stuff right and let them know that they're doing a good job. Publicly praise people. You know how to do that. Anyway, say hi to everybody every morning. Go shake everyone's hand. Greet them by name. Know everybody's name. Eat lunch with people. I don't understand why some bigger productions have a separate place to eat for the above the line folks. I think you should be mixing as a producer. You should be mixing with your cast and crew, your extras, because that way you find out what's going on. And plus, you build morale and you show them that you're just like everybody's the same. You might think that paying people is good enough, but it's not. I've seen people just disappear off a set because the morale was low. Don't overwork people. Another thing, know the cost of an extra day. That same film that I keep complaining about, one night we were at this location and the EP wanted to rewrite, the executive producer wanted to rewrite a scene. And I watched him doing this and I went off and I calculated how much the cost of an extra day would be. And I went back and I said, if we don't finish this shoot in the next 2 hours, that's going to be an extra $7,000 for you, or whatever the number was. And he was shocked, but we went ahead and did not do the rewrite. Same thing with the director who wants to do an inordinate amount of takes. Just keep an eye on that as a producer. track your cost versus budget. So not at the end of the shoot, but like every day, no matter how much each day is supposed to cost and how much you actually spend. And if you can save money in any way by getting free food or free anything, then do it. My fourth film, DIY, was done almost exclusively with free stuff. So, and then communicate. Make sure you're letting people know what's going on. Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? Those are some of the bigger things. What are we doing tomorrow? Where are we going to be? Things like that. And I put, but insulate, because when you're dealing with problems, you don't have to tell everybody about all the problems you're dealing with. That film Trade-In, my third film, the two producers, myself and my producing partner, the AD and the director, were the only ones who knew all the problems we were having with the EP. Everyone else was having a great time. So that's your job. Deal with the problems, not sharing them with everybody else. Another thing on production is the biggest relationship is you with your producer. With your director. So your role depends mainly on the director's experience. So one of the directors, my first two films, the director had produced 5 films before that and directed one other film. So he was experienced. I didn't have to do much in terms of overseeing him. The next film I was on, the director had done a whole bunch of short films. I knew he was very talented. I didn't get involved too much with what he was doing. A short film that I was on, a DP was the director. He DP'd a whole bunch of stuff, very experienced guy. So I didn't worry about his camera use and camera angles and the shot framing and stuff, but I did help him out in working with actors because that was his weak area. So know what your director's strengths and weaknesses are and adapt to that. That's kind of what I just said. Your job is to get the director's vision on the screen, not what your vision is. Now, this is something you've already discussed when you were hiring the director and in pre-production. So during the shoot, you should not be imposing anything new on the director at this point. You just want to give the director enough time to do his or her job well and insulate them from any problems. Okay. Sometimes you have to be the voice of reason. One of my directors wanted to have a monkey in one scene, completely unnecessary. But I said, let me look into it. This is in Tucson. I called up to a film animal company up in Phoenix. They didn't have any monkeys. I went back and told him we can't get a monkey. He was happy with it. He just wanted really to see that I was taking him seriously, even if it was crazy. So that's part of your job. All right. We had the question about distribution earlier. That's where we are now after you've done your production and your post-production. Let's see, there it is. Okay. You can sell the film before, during, or after production. Most commonly, it's going to be after production. But if you have a named director, a named actor, someone that's really attractive to a distributor or an international sales agent, then yeah, go ahead and see if you can get that sale ahead of time. That might help you with the funding to be able to say, we have distribution. Here's the minimum guarantee from the distributor. You might be able to borrow against that minimum guarantee. So that's great. But on the independent film side, it's probably going to be after production. Now, some distributors might say, yeah, when you get some footage, send it to us. That's the during part. I would just wait at that point until you have a finished product, because then you have color correction, you have the music in there and everything, and it's the best. You're putting your best foot forward. Let's see, where am I in the notes? Okay, and plus you could go out to trade magazines or to film festivals and get reviews that you can quote as you're sending a query out to your distributors and say, well, look at what so-and-so said about our film. So that's another advantage of waiting until afterwards. Start with your biggest distributors, your studios, Lionsgate. I was going to say though, Netflix, Amazon. Go to the big ones first. And if you've done your networking, if you've been building relationships, this can pay off here. And if you get no, then you go to the next level down, until you get your yes. So the bigger distributors will do better. Generally, will do better with your film. If you end up with a small company, okay. Before that, okay. So you might split up your distribution: theatrical one company, streaming another company, international another company. Some companies might want to do all of that, and so You have to use your judgment when you get an offer in. So an example, my first film, early on, MRC wanted to buy it, Media Rights Capital, one of the biggest independent distributors. Now, but they only wanted it for digital, and this was 2008, I think, and digital was really nothing. And so I was afraid of giving away a piece of the distribution that someone else might come in and want to do everything, and they might say, okay, no, we don't want your project because you already gave away digital. Well, in hindsight, I probably should have gone with MRC because they would have been great, and the digital obviously became a big thing. But that was a decision I made at the time, and there's no use kicking myself for it. But think about that when you get your offers in, if they're not for everything. If you go with a smaller distributor, check with the other producers that have been distributed by them and find out if they were happy with them. I tried to do that with the distributors I went with, and they hadn't been around long enough to have a track record with these other producers. But I got word back from these other producers, yeah, we're happy with them. We haven't seen yet what they can do for us, but so far they've been good. And I went with them, and they actually, they got our film into every DVD outlet, so that was good. But they didn't do any marketing, and that was the problem. So make sure your distributor is going to market your film, or else nobody's going to know about it. Also, you have a right in the contract to audit the money trail. If you have any reason to believe that you're not getting all the money you should, then go ahead and exercise that right. Unless you're really good business-wise, you'll probably have to hire an auditor to help you on that. And so you have to really know, or have a good feeling that you'll end up getting more money back than you're paying the auditor. So do it. I think you should do it. But just know that, they probably are doing the right thing. So be careful with that. All right. There's just so much more we could talk about, but that is, all these things here. But that's all we can really fit. I don't know what the time it is. I have a clock in front of me. I will cover just a couple things. References. I mentioned the second thing there, the Louise Levison book about business plans. The first one is a book that I consider like a great owner's manual as a producer. It's not for everyone. I think Penelope did not like that book, but I even used it in preparing this presentation. Bankroll is a book about written by an independent producer on how he raised money. Lawrence Turman is an Oscar-nominated producer of The Graduate and about 40 other films. He also runs the master's producing program at USC. He's got a wonderful book. PJ, I don't have to go through all of these, but anyway, Stephen Follow, we used a lot of his information in our business plan. Steve Marinaccio is a great line producer, and Good in a Room is all about pitching. Really excellent book on pitching.
And we'll be able to give those your slides, not necessarily all your slides, but your reference slides to the audience, correct?
Okay with me. So, and then my contact information here. I'm always available to answer questions or get together for coffee or a beer. And you know how to reach me now. So email me anytime if you have specific questions, or after this you come up with a question, go ahead and ask. I think Rebecca has one or two that might have been submitted.
1 or 2 or 16. So we're just gonna kind of roll through them. We're gonna call this a lightning flash round. So LLC, can you have one LLC for multiple projects?
I would advise you not to. It doesn't cost much to form an LLC. Hang on, I'm trying to turn off my sharing. How do I do that? Anyway, I don't know how to do this. All right, anyway, I would say no, you should have one for every project, because if you have one project that does well and one project that somebody feels like they want money from you for, they will sue you to get that money that from the project that did well, if you put them under the same LLC. So that's the reason you have an LLC for each project, so that nobody can sue one project and get money from another project.
Yes, it will protect you, and it's worth it. When can one call themselves a producer?
I laugh because there are people who call themselves a producer and they
haven't produced anything.
Right. And it's not that you have to produce something. I feel like if you're doing the work, if you are developing a project, if you are learning, if you're doing any of the stuff we talked about on the early slide, if you're developing your relationships with a really firm mind that you are going to produce, then you're a producer. It's like, when do you call yourself an actor? When you start taking the acting classes? Probably. You don't have to have been cast in the lead in a studio film to be an actor. So,
I will tell you this, and I say this to up and coming producers, up and coming actors, which is when you are smart enough to actually categorize what you're doing, if you're an emerging producer, if you are a student producer, it actually does help for other people to understand that you are self-aware of where you're at in your career. And so I do think that is important, specifically when you're emerging or new to the industry. Okay, I'd love recommendations on writing the log line. There's a couple books, I think.
yeah, there are a lot of sources for that information. There's no real law about it. My favorite comes from producer to producer, and it goes something like this: title, genre, format. So Tiger 03 is a feature film, feature military film, in which, and then you go on and say, a flawed protagonist meets this inciting incident, faces these odds to achieve this goal. And that's it. Today at the this afternoon at the, I think it was this afternoon, or maybe it was yesterday at the one of the recent VME sessions, someone else gave a who, what. Who is your protagonist? What has happened, and what are they trying to achieve, or what are they trying to achieve, and what are they up against? Something like that. But there are many. Keep it to absolutely don't go over 2 sentences. If you can do it in one, better yet.
Devin Edwards, are you saying that a first-time writer can't be considered a writer? There have been first-time writers that won the Nicholas Fellowship and who made successful feature films.
Oh, in fact, what I think I said was, sure, there are examples of first-time writers who do a great job, but the odds are against it, is what I said.
Sure,
so, yeah.
and it's also the producers kind of right to be able to get the best. I always say you want your players to play and get the best folks for the job, and good producers, I think, find the right person for the job. And sometimes that's a up and coming first time writer, and sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm. I've been to some of the Producers Guild screenings for theatrical releases, just a couple, in which they said, yeah, this is the first time writer and it's their first screenplay. So yes, it happens.
How do you choose what's a good story? Are you going off your own personal tastes? What's trending now? Is it something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, so not what's trending now, because by the time it gets made, it won't be trending anymore. Characters that I love, stories that I can't stop thinking about. We develop everything in-house. So if you're talking about what screenplay would we be looking for, we're not the right production company to answer that. And that's why you have these informational meetings. You go and you meet with people and you ask them that question. What kind of things are you looking for? Because it's different for everyone. Some are looking for a certain budget range, a certain genre. The Grindstone meeting yesterday spelled out what they were looking for. Very limited. I think there were 4 genres that they're interested in. When we were at Amazon, they had 3 things that they were looking for, 3 types of films. And so it varies from company to company. But the biggest thing is great writing, great story, great characters. Those are 3 things.
Great. And I am going to show you guys where this recording is going to be found at the end of this. Hopefully we'll be able to get through this in the next 10 minutes. Mike, where does one go to apply for loans for a production? What kind of interest rates are offered for production loans?
I don't know about the interest rates, but Bank of America has a division that lends to film. All the major banks do. I say all of them. I think the major films all do. This gets back to looking on IMDb and seeing where they've lent, or just Googling that exact same question. I have not borrowed from a bank yet, so I can't answer from my own experience, but I've met people from those banks who said, yeah, when you're ready, contact me. Here's my card.
Perfect. From Reggie, to determine your overall budget, do you consider prospective cast or directors rates? In other words, do you know what is a reasonable budget for your film? I think we went over a lot of that, but you can go ahead and summary, Brian, then we'll move on to Steve Harris's question.
We have one film that started as a $2 million film, and then we brought it down to 1.7, and then last week we brought it down to 1.2, and it all involved basically lowering everyone's pay and cutting some people and cutting some days. But you can almost make a film for any budget you want if you're willing to go with lesser and lesser talented people who are willing to take, not talented, experienced people who are willing to take lower rates. So look at what you've done before and double or triple or quadruple it, and look at that as your target, I would say.
Steve Harris, if I wrote a script and plan on directing the film, do I lose creative control and future royalties once I get a producer?
If you wrote the script and what? Was it
if he's writing and he wants to direct, does bringing on a producer take away creative control and future royalties?
No. You just make that clear when you bring on that producer. Here's what our terms are.
From Susan, what are the pluses and minuses of crowdfunding?
So, excuse me. The pluses are you can get some money, and you don't have to pay anyone back, and nobody expects to be paid back. Maybe they expect a credit on the screen, as we've seen in a few films. This long list of crowdfunding contributors. The negatives to me are the biggest one is that you probably can't raise millions of dollars. You can raise hundreds of thousands possibly. But the other one is it's almost like a production itself. You have to do videos, you have to put more videos up, they have to look good. I mean, if you're showing yourself as a filmmaker, then your videos for crowdfunding, I would think, would have to be fairly well produced. And to me, I would rather ask 100 people for money, or 1,000, let's say a few hundred people for money, than ask thousands of people for a little bit of money. So asking a few people for a lot of money rather than a lot of people for a little bit of money. The math-wise, it all works out, but it's just, my personality is more to reach out individually to people.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to, there have been some feature films on the military genre side that have gotten a couple $1 million for financing. But those, I think you have to look at crowdfunding as a way to inspire an audience before you even make the piece. And Brian is right in that the production of there are crowdfunding experts who are paid to basically create your project, and they get paid really well because it's a ton of work to be able to create the themes, and you're basically creating an entire lookbook. Crowdfunding, though, I will say, to a comment on the short films, is a great way to handle paying for short films. And so if you are a producer who's trying to get a few films under their belt, and you're looking to raise, starting, on the low end of $5,000, $10,000 to kind of crank out a few short films, it's actually a great way to do that if you know what you're doing. And so there are a few classes. Actually, we're going to be providing a crowdfunding class. Steed and Spark is a great partner, specifically in how to raise money in this environment, given that everyone kind of tonally, it's a very difficult time to ask for money. However, people still need to finance their art. And so we're going to be providing a class probably in about 2 weeks on that. So stay tuned for that. For private equity individuals who might not have a ton of knowledge or experience in the industry, how do you broach the topic without overwhelming them with a pitch deck and terminology they're not familiar with?
Well, I don't think a pitch deck is overwhelming because I think that's one of the tools to make them more confident. I think that what we've done is to put together a package that shows the industry overall how profitable your typical film is. And we explain that the bad reputation, the risky reputation that film has, comes from people who invest in their niece's first film, or they don't make the right choices. They don't make the same business choices they would make if they were investing in a restaurant or a shoe company or whatever it happens to be. So if they make those smart choices, and implicitly, of course, we are the smart choices, then they can make good money. And we show them the statistics that we've researched and spent weeks and weeks and weeks of researching so that we can give them valid data and that will make them comfortable. So but it is a tough sell. We've had very wealthy people say, I'm interested in doing film, but I'm not comfortable right now until I know more about it. And your business plan was great. It gave me a lot of information, but I'm still not comfortable. And I don't think there's anything you can do about that. You gave it your best shot. Reach out to the next person until you find the one who will be comfortable.
How did you get into the PGA?
I had made 4 films already. The requirement on the film side is 2 feature films. So, but I had made 4 that had been, and they had to get some sort of distribution. And then I just applied. Roger Corman was my sponsor. You have to have a PGA member who will sponsor you, and he knew of 2 of my films because the director had worked for him at some point in the past and sent them to him, and he had replied very favorably about those films, so I responded very favorably. So I reached out to him and said, will you sponsor me in the PGA? And he said, yeah. And I will say that once you've joined, let's say you're asking because you might join, I would say make sure you participate so you get the most out of it. What just happened? Oh, that's you. Okay. Yeah, make sure you get the most out of it by going to the events and going to the training and meeting people, doing your networking, because that's really what it's all about. Go ahead. Next question.
So really quickly, I'm going to answer a couple of these questions, which are, where are these slides going to be found? I think the resource slides as well as the recording are going to be found here. So this is the VME Connect website. If you just click on your member login to manage your account, you'll see a couple tabs. Typically, you'll be here at this beginning where you can kind of change your profile and stuff. But if you come over here to the resource page, there is an online class and resource page. You can click on here. This is your password. This will be changed in the next month. But you just click on here. Okay, put the password in. And we'll make sure that we post a lot of the recordings here. Okay, so that's where you'll be able to find both the resource page as well as this class.
And if you're really anxious to get it right away, then just send me an email.
Awesome.
Or Facebook, whatever.
So here we go. Does your handling of the chain of title end when you sell or get distribution?
I don't remember. The last film I sold was in 2010-ish, and I don't remember how that worked. I think the distributor takes ownership. It may be just a 7-year or whatever the term is, which is typically 7 years, that they own it, but I don't remember, sorry.
Okay. What percentage of the whole distribution of your production should an investor be allowed to get without giving away your soul?
Oh, if somebody wants to fund the whole thing, they can fund the whole thing. The money's got to come from somewhere. Of course, it's more expensive on the back end to be giving away half your money to an investor. So if you can borrow all of it instead of lending or instead of getting private equity, then more power to you, because then you just have to pay interest until the borrowing has been paid off. But sometimes the private equity side seems like the easiest way. I don't know if any of it's easy.
Can we submit our scripts to you to be read? Do you hire veterans writers for work?
I just gotta be honest. I'm really horrible at reading scripts. We develop everything in house. There's only been one script we didn't develop in house. I would say we're not looking for any projects, but there are hundreds of production companies that do read scripts all the time. We're just not one of them. It's just
Yeah, I always say to people when they say, will you read my script? Or the reality is like producers, directors are developing their own projects. And so, you know, that's an interesting thing because we get that all the time at VME. We get people sometimes that get angry about it. And the reality is that people are developing and passionate about their own projects. So very rarely do you see people willing to like actually read other projects, because then you're getting involved with someone you actually don't know. There's a whole thing. Any thoughts on that, Karen?
Yeah, I agree. And the blacklist that Franklin Leonard has, which is a reading service, they provide coverage for feature films and all that. They're working with us to get a discount for all our members. And that's a professional group of readers that are trained. If everybody's familiar with the blacklist, I think 12 of the last 14 Best Picture awards have come from those screenplays sourced there or recommended and get approval there. So I would highly encourage you look at the blacklist. And we should have Franklin Leonard, who founded that, was a former guest speaker here some years ago, is going to be doing an online class with us in May. And then he would like to support us because he's son of an Army vet. I don't want to say that's just Army, but it does seem like a very nice thing. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. What do you think, Brian? Is it an Army thing? Okay, so that's what I would say. And producers don't normally like to read a lot of scripts. I know I don't because of time, and also you're already kind of committed to your own projects. And like Brian said, there's certain groups that want to do that. And maybe, Brian, we can find someone who can aggregate which groups are looking for scripts, so we can help out our fellow members. Okay.
Mike actually had a connection to a Dominican investor, and he says to get in touch with him. So
which Mike is this?
We will send you. I will send you Mike Ternovsky. Alexander, what 3 types of movies is Amazon looking for? And Jesse will get to you. I'll open your mic, Jesse.
I wish I could remember now. Penelope might be. I don't want to put Penelope on the spot ever, but
I didn't
do you remember
her,
Penelope? This is her, right?
Okay.
Below me.
Oh, don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a few months, and a couple of ours fit into those categories, but I don't remember what they were. I remember one of them was like 80s thrillers. It was a really obscure thing. I feel like family films was I'm just making them up now. I don't remember. You know what I'll do is I'll look it up and I will post it on the Facebook page or on the website, one of the two.
Do you have any advice for executive producers who want to invest in films? How can we find good projects to invest in? Well, anonymous, you can definitely contact Rebecca. No.
Yeah, I will say one thing about that. At least one thing is, look for marketable stuff. Look for what they call high concept films that definitely have a big audience. Of course, that'll depend on how much you're willing to invest. If you have 500,000, then you're probably looking at a horror film that will, in terms of statistically, which one will do best. If you have 10 million or 30, then look for high concept films that the studio will want to distribute, and the kind of thing you see in theaters. And of course, contact Rebecca and I and Karen and Penelope.
Yeah.
We'd be happy
we do know a lot of people who are looking for financing. So if you're talking about a smaller amount, there are young veterans in our group who are obviously looking for financing, but feel free to get in touch with us.
Thank you for calling me young.
Is self-distribution a bad thing?
No, it's not a bad thing. For a while, and I would say, what is this, 10, 15 years ago, it was like everyone was saying that's what you have. That was the future of independent film, is taking your film around, four-walling it and selling DVDs. And I don't know how that works. I don't know that anyone really does that. It was popular for a couple years, but people found out that they didn't want to be salesmen. They wanted to be filmmakers. And but if that's something you like, then do it. Any source of money is good. And sometimes that's a way to show a distributor how popular your film is.
Awesome. So I think we've made it through the questions. Jesse Feldberg, I am allowing you to talk if you want to ask your question in person. And then I think we're going to wrap up. If you have any other questions, just raise your hand and I can just have you ask Brian directly. But I think, Jesse, you need to unmute your mic.
Jesse, do you see it where you unmute? Down in the lower or upper left, there's a mute button.
Jesse, this is your one opportunity to talk to Brian McLaughlin and you are ruining it.
Do it, Jesse, do it. We're rooting for you. Unmute your mic.
Well, I guess he maybe he went somewhere.
Okay, you can email me. Jesse.
Yeah, but I think that's it. If anybody else has any question, you can kind of do the hand raised. Hey.
Sorry, it's Penelope.
Hey, Penelope.
I was just pulling up my notes from our meeting with Michael Chung, the guy at Amazon, and they
Michael
are looking.
Chung.
Oh, sorry, I probably shouldn't say it. Delete that name. Check. I say one thing. Here's what he's looking for. YA. So that's, high school.
Everybody's looking for YA.
But he specified not really the middle school crowd, but high school and college. Sexy, erotic thrillers.
Of
like
course.
Basic Instinct, Fatal Attraction, Cruel Intentions type. And dark themed thrillers, not really horror, but could have some horror elements. That was the three that he specifically mentioned. He, the unnamed person from Amazon, mentioned those three that they're looking for. All right, I'm gonna mute myself again.
Perfect. And for those who are, that's what Amazon was looking for as far as on the feature side, right? That you were specifically looking at features. Awesome. Cool. Well, Karen, if you're on, I just want to thank Brian so much. Brian has been a huge supporter. He is a wealth of knowledge. I think we probably will be doing a follow-up class maybe where we can dive into some of those other topics like IP and other things. But thank you so much for joining us. Karen, any last words before we sign off?
I just want to thank everybody for joining tonight. And I really want to thank Brian, who's been a staunch supporter of his fellow veterans in VME for years. And this is just one of the many great classes that he's put together. Thank you, Brian.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
Thank you, guys.
He's very funny. He's very funny at the bar. If you guys ever get a night out or get him for a coffee.
And Brian, if you open your chat box as people sign off, you can go ahead and give kind words to Brian, myself, or Karen, because these are very, it has been a challenging couple of weeks to try to get all this stuff online, but I feel like it's been great and working, and I think we had about 80 people on this line. So
great.
Go Air Force. Oh, Lord.
You missed your chance for that.
Thank you so much from Alexander. This has been great. Wayne, thanks everybody. If you're ever on the East Coast, we'll show you the best bars. Wait a minute, best bars in Hampton, Virginia. I want to go there.
I assume that means after the quarantine is over.
Yes, after quarantine.
Libby,
great presentation, Ryan. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for great information. I'm starting production side, and this was invaluable. So stay safe and go Army. Yeah, buddy. Go ahead, Derek. Is Hammerhead still open in Virginia? These efforts are great. They're invaluable. Thank you guys so much. It really means a lot to hear. And when we have a smaller group, I think maybe next time, Brian, we'll talk about doing smaller groups so we'll be able to actually see people and be able to interact with them. Mm-hmm. But there was just a large demand on like this intro. And so that's why we decided to go the webinar route. So, ooh, phenomenal. Willem Kelso, phenomenal information. Thank you to our VME volunteers. Cool. Well, thank you guys. That's it. We're going to sign off. Enjoy your Fridays.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.